All right, Job chapter 36, let's call this one A Teacher Like Him, a verse or a quote that comes right out of the chapter as we look at the way that Elihu finishes up his response to Job. And I apologize in advance because my chapter summaries this week are going to be more like chapter outlines because it's been that kind of week. But in this chapter, Elihu is going to challenge Job to name a teacher like God, as he's going to describe God in the first half of the chapter as not just being a teacher, but a guide to the afflicted. And why does that matter? Because Job is in the middle of afflictions and he is discouraged. But Elihu is going to remind Job of the ways in which God does not simply aid the afflicted, but he guides the afflicted, often ironically enough, through their afflictions. Why? Because as we sometimes say around here, there are no good guys and bad guys in this story. The only person named perfect to have lived in this story we call the Bible is Christ himself. Everybody else is trying to work through an assortment of external challenges and internal problems, self-imposed difficulties that we sometimes have to struggle through. And Elihu is reminding Job that in delivering the afflicted from their external challenges, God is also working out the self-imposed things that we do to get in our own way. And so he says through their afflictions, God helps to perfect them. He doesn't literally say that, but that comes from the New Testament when we see the Hebrew writers say that Christ is not ashamed to call his brothers brothers because they share in the afflictions that perfected him, understanding that he had no sin. God still put him through the kinds of difficulties and sufferings that perfected something in him. And so we've said that we see in Job, in some ways, even though he's not perfect, a picture of Christ because he is attacked as a blameless man who God, as we've already said, identifies as someone God has already said is going through this because of no fault of his own. But we are still seeing his character perfected through the affliction, even though the affliction is not the result of his sin. And so as Elihu goes on to, as the title suggests, challenge Job to think, who is a teacher like God? He is going to bring out, one, the fact that you can't really understand God. And as you've already pointed out, Job, you can't necessarily understand all the ways in which he works. Of course, that's my paraphrase, but ultimately what he is going to say is there's still something that you can understand in this. As in the next chapter, he's going to start out by saying, keep listening, Job. But the middle of this chapter is going to highlight two impediments to Job still being able to hear what God is saying in quite possibly some very subtle ways. And it's the fact that Job is locked in on the injustice of his situation. And the translations are going to be super split on the verse that talks about Job and judgment in this chapter. Some suggesting that Job is fixated on the fact that it does not seem that God is bringing effective judgment against the wicked. Other translations are going to suggest that Job is actually suffering the condemnation due the wicked. But that is inconsistent with what Elihu was angry about in the beginning of his address when he was upset with Job's friends for falsely accusing Job, or essentially accusing him without being able to answer the simple question, okay, what did Job actually do? And so I think that what Elihu is actually saying here is, look, Job, you're preoccupied with whether or not you're going to get a just response. And moreover, you're in such a difficult situation that you just want out. And those are two things that can get in the way of you understanding what God is trying to show you, like we said, quite possibly subtly in this situation. The frustration you have with the injustice of what you're going through right now, understanding that as bleak as it seems, it's not over. You haven't seen the conclusion yet. And then two, the affliction, which is hot enough or it's difficult enough that you just want out. And those two things can prevent you from seeing what God is trying to show you in this situation, which reminds me of something that Jesus said in his own ministry, something we've mentioned before, and that is the purpose of parables. And I heard it explained in a way that stuck with me when I heard a preacher once say, look, when Jesus was telling parables or giving parables to the crowd, some people got a lesson, others just got a story, and it had everything to do with their perspective on the story, which was fundamentally a story, but it was a story with a point. And so what Elihu, the young man, seems to be helping Job to realize is that, look, this is just suffering if you allow it to just be suffering. But God speaks even in our suffering, and compounding the tragedy of the suffering is missing the things that he's trying to tell us, things that don't necessarily have anything to do with something that we might have done wrong. And so my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that neither the injustice in our situation nor the difficulty of our situation make us want to weigh out so badly that we miss what God is trying to teach us.